Are you new to teaching elementary music, or do you feel like you're just spinning your wheels every day in your classroom? Maybe you're overwhelmed and honestly just don't know where to go for advice and mentorship. Hi, I'm Jessica, and when I'm not drinking all the coffee, watching Razorback sports, or hanging out with my family of boys, it's my passion to help elementary music teachers just like you teach your students by using your unique personality and teaching style. In this podcast, you'll find helpful tips, strategies, and ideas that will help you kick that stress to the curb and begin teaching music with confidence. Let's get started. Hey y'all, welcome back to the podcast. Today you are in for a treat. I am joined by the amazing Justin Mclean, who is one of the duos. Him and Eric have the podcast, The Score. And if you are not aware of this podcast, you need to go listen right now. Well, maybe after you hear his episode today on my podcast. But I'm telling you, it's an amazing podcast and he's an amazing dude. And I'm so excited to interview him today about intentional bridge building in music classrooms. In this episode, we're going to talk about all the things about what building bridges really means, why it's so important, and ways to connect with your students on a deeper level. Let me tell you a little bit about Justin. He's currently the Percussion Director and Assistant Director of Bands at Hightower High School and Lake Olympia Middle School Band in Fort Bend ISD. He is a Texas native, raised in Rosenberg, Texas, in a humble community which is right outside of Houston. He loves music, and he began his love of music at an early age, was heavily influenced in church through both gospel and secular artists and musicians. His ambitions propelled him to strive for excellence, not only in his personal aspirations, but also in his academic, professional life, and to his wife, Brittany, and 3 beautiful children, Lennox, Blaise, and Cairo. He received a bachelor's degree in music education from Prairie View A&M University in 2011 and has had the pleasure of educating and training young musicians as a band director and percussion instructor for the past 9 years in Houston ISD and now Fort Bend ISD. He's also a devoted music director and student minister in his local church and currently pursuing a master's divinity degree, the Reformed Theological Seminary. So you are in, like I said, for a treat. This conversation was so good, and we could have kept going for hours and hours and hours. It just flowed, and I know you were going to just feel like you're part of this conversation, which is honestly my goal with every single guest I have on here. So grab your cup of coffee, water, whatever you are drinking right now, and join me and Justin for today's conversation. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. I am super excited to be joined by Justin. I already introduced him in the intro a little bit, but I want him to tell you a little bit more about himself and his journey in becoming a music educator and anything else he would like to tell you about himself. So welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
First off, I want to say thank you for having me. I think it's really kind of it's unreal that this is happening. Me and Eric talk about this all the time, that we just kind of started with just, very basic intentions of just giving some of our information and what has helped us and things that have worked in our circumstances, just to help other music educators that may come up like us or come through the ranks like us, that whether they're elementary, middle school, or high school. Yeah. So thank you. We appreciate the platform. I love what you're doing. But a little bit about myself. I am a small town country boy, and I don't say that just to be very PC, but I grew up in a small town outside of Houston, probably 30, 45 minutes, just depending on where you are. It's called Rosenberg, Texas. I was introduced to music through church, man. That is my first inkling of notes and song and melody and rhythm. My grandmother played a lot of gospel music and R&B and things of that nature. Grew up around all of those, hip hop, all that kind of stuff. But church was definitely where I got introduced to music. And from there, I started playing drums at a young age. Probably about 4 or 5 is my earliest memory of me kind of jumping on a stool that was taller than me and trying to hit on cymbals and things like that. But just had a natural knack for it. And from there, I got into 6th grade. Now, by the time I got to 6th grade, I had already been playing in church. I had already been kind of familiar with music and all of these kinds of things. But when I got to 6th grade, there was the instrumental drive or a band run where you choose an instrument and this, that, and the third. So I'd already made up in my mind. I was like, Mom, I know we're going in here, but I'm a drummer, and that's what I want to play. That's what I want to do. And she was like, well, you should try to, you never know. I was like, Mom, listen, come on, what are we doing? All right, I'm going here to play drums. So long story short, I went in and I was rude to those guys. I was just like, I don't want to play this. I don't want to play that. And I probably went through the motions, and I ended up becoming a percussionist. And that took me on through my journey, man. I think that church, musical or gospel music and playing in church, along with learning um, in the infrastructure of the band world, propelled me as a musician. I think I had a lot of natural ability, just doing it every Sunday or every Wednesday and all that kind of stuff. But on top of going to school and being introduced to a new platform and a new space of what music was, it kind of helped. And so from there, I went to Prairie View A&M University, which is a historically Black college and university, and I studied music ed. And I graduated spring 11, and I learned a lot there. It wasn't necessarily my it probably wouldn't come up on the list of schools to go to for music in the state of Texas or even in the U.S., just to be perfectly honest. But what I got there was I got great teaching from some of world-renowned professors and doctors. I created long-lasting relationships, and they opened a lot of doors for me. And while I was there, I met Eric, who was my partner in crime for our podcast, and we became good friends. And I believe God puts people in your life for a specific reason. Nothing happens by chance. And so our friendship, when I graduated, he needed somebody to come and help him. And the friendship started, the work relationship started, and here we are today. And so my goal is not to be the band savant as though I know everything, but it's more so just to be a voice, to be an avenue for directors that look like me, that may not even look like me, but may end up teaching in environments that I grew up in, that the kids that I taught in, that they could be successful. And I just think that's what we do as musicians, right? Like even with your podcast and what we do, we may have different contexts and environments, but a lot of the things we do are the same. We just do them differently. They manifest themselves differently. And so my goal is to be that, is to be a voice, to be a source of help and understanding. And whatever kid is coming out of music ed school or going into teaching or 10 years in, 20 years in, the same way I can learn from them, I want them to learn from me. So that's just a small tidbit.
Yeah, I love that. And you are a band director, correct?
Yes.
And so you told me before we started recording that you have always, well, not always, like for your whole life, but since you've been a music teacher, you've been a band director, and that you love middle school. And so I want to kind of touch on this a minute, because when you said that, I told you that a lot of the elementary music teachers I work with or talk to, they say to me that upper elementary, 4th and 5th grade usually is their hardest grade levels to teach. And so why were you telling me you love teaching middle school so much?
Man, you know why? Because I feel like we look at education and sometimes we fall in love with the early and the after. And the after is like 9 through 12. The early is kindergarten to about 2nd or 3rd grade. But that 5th through 8th, 4th through 7th grade are the years that kids need teachers the most. And those are the formative years. And I get it. They're hard years. You know, when you think about it, when I student taught, the 4th and 5th graders, they were a rowdy bunch. But they were in this weird place where I'm not a 3rd grader. Like I know how to go to the restroom without, having an accident, right? But at the same time, I'm still scary about speaking in front of a crowd, right? And so I think we have to be, I think what it did for me was it made me want to be that source of comfort and accountability that those kids need as they are beginning to understand who they are, what they like, what they don't like, what are their non-negotiables, we start seeing the essence of who they are start to really thrive. Like if they are a debater, then we could see that as something is like, why are you debating me? But we want them to have a voice. If it's kids that are super helpful, the kids in 4th and 5th grade that seem like teachers' pets, but they're just people that really they have a servant heart, right? And how do we help them understand that? Because we know middle school is, oh, you're a teacher's pet. You know, you're bullied, you're being made fun of. So I think for me, I'd rather go into a place where most people wouldn't want to go and be successful and just do the hard work, man. I love it. I love seeing kids see what they can't do or even just grow from a place where they never thought they'd get out of, you know, and they hit 8th grade and they go to high school and they come back to me and they're able to be like, Mr. Mclean, man, I want to appreciate you and all this kind of stuff. And for me, I'm just like, that's what I'm here for, man. I'm here to help you. I'm here to do what needs to be done. And so that was my thing. I want to go to the place where most people don't want to go because it's hard and it's frustrating and, you know, but it's so much joy there, so much joy. And I feel like I learned how to be a real educator at that school. You know, in my position now, although I'm not solely a band director, I'm a percussion director for 2 campuses, and I also assist as the band. So I still get on the podium from time to time, but my main focus is building the percussionists from 6 all the way through high school. But yet and still, I would not be prepared to do what I'm able to do, which is teaching across ultimately seven grades, 6 through 12.
Right.
I don't know if I would be able to do that if I didn't spend my formative years teaching beginner flute, beginner clarinet, beginner sax, beginner percussion, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been a joy.
I love that so much. No, seriously, because I think that is the people listening right now need to hear that middle school's not as intimidating as you might think it is. And just with anything new, like I do have listeners that teach all the way K to 12, you know, in the smaller schools. And so it is doable. And it's just like anything new, getting in there and doing it is just learning as you go, and you will figure it out. And if it's not going as great as you thought it would your first year, there's always year 2. Keep going in, keep meeting your students where they're at, and keep trying. That's the main goal. Just don't give up.
I like what you said, trying, because in middle school, those kids are changing from one grade to the next, right? The kid I met in 6th grade is not necessarily going to be the kid that's in 8th grade. Right? Like they might have been the quiet, shy kid, and they still may be that to a certain extent, but it's up to me to be able to help them kind of flesh that out, to know when, where, and how to do that. And so it's just waking up every day. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like most people, and I don't think this is a bad thing. I don't want to say this as it being, you know, negative, but I think a lot of people don't want to try, right? I think with second graders and first graders, you pretty much get the same kid every day, you know, because they're just, you know, they just cute little kids, man.
They're excited.
Right. But when you get to middle school, you have to know that they're changing not only week to week, month to month, but period to period, right? Like what they experienced in homeroom or in second period or, you know, on the bus stop getting to school might have sent their whole day bad. And so the student you saw yesterday is the same student, but they're learning how to deal with the issues of growing up. Somebody said something to me. A teacher was rude. My parent didn't say they loved me when I got out of the car today. So that makes me feel a type of way, you know? So we have to be really patient and graceful and loving. And I think that can be hard sometimes because we as adults are dealing with things as well. So,
so true. Yeah. And a lot of teachers, not just music teachers, but teachers are guilty. I know, thinking back to some of the teachers I had, were just guilty of being like, keep going. Even if I was feeling a certain way or having emotions, it's like, I knew, like, you know, you still got to do the work. You can't just sit there and be lazy, but it's also like, I mean, y'all have no idea what I just went through at home, and I'm bringing it back to school and I'm having to just deal with it. And so be labeled as quiet, or you're not wanting to participate, or what's wrong with you. And just like, first of all, don't call the kids out, because that's embarrassing them. Second of all, like you said, sometimes they're going through things that you could never even realize. Like, I love how you said that, even from period to period.
Yeah, man.
Day to day, it can change because something may have happened. Yeah.
And I had to learn that, you know, in my second year, you know, third year teaching, I had to figure out tools that I could use, because a kid may come in and be super, what we would call insubordinate and, you know, disrespectful. But I'm like, okay, what has happened? So what does it look like for me to say, hey, let's talk outside real quick. Everybody else, pull out your pencils, go to this piece. We're going to be looking at measures X, Y, Z. Go ahead and go over those measures. I want to pick up there. We step outside. What's going on? at that moment, that student is probably going to do one or two things. They're going to shut down further because this is something that you've never done and they don't know whether to trust it, or they're going to break down crying or have an emotional outburst because they feel comfortable enough to say, I'm going through this, or this teacher did this, or this boy said this to me, whatever the case may be. Then in that moment, you say, hey, we got a job to do in here. I got to still teach. You still got to learn. Let's figure out the quick fix for right now. I want you to go to the restroom, get yourself together, meet me back in the classroom. After class, we can talk to this. I'll write you a pass to your next class. Yeah. What that does is wonders for that kid. It does not solve the situation. It does not change the outcome of what they may be going through, because it would be too prideful of us to feel like I can fix this in this moment. Yeah. What you can do is just be an ear. You can be a voice of reason or a voice of advice, even if that child is in the wrong. I've had some students that have said, well, it happened, yada, yada, yada. I said, well, you know you were in the wrong. Well, I know, but we'll talk about this after class. What I need from you right now is I need you to commit to learning. If I'm going to commit to teaching you, I say, I got things happening in my life as well, but I'm here to learn. I'm here to teach you. So let's do that, and we could talk afterwards. And man, that did wonders for my teaching, where kids would even come in and tell me ahead of time, Mr. Mclean, if I seem like I'm like not paying attention, cool. All right. I need you to be focused though. Don't let that allow you to cause disruptions for the rest of the class. And it just worked. You know, it worked for me to just take time to be patient. And I get it, especially for my middle school band directors. You are working towards your district or county's, concert contests or whatever, preparing kids for region band or all city or all district. I get it. It's pressure. Yeah. But that pressure cannot take away from the direction that the kids need, from the care that they need. Because if so, then the things you're trying to accomplish won't ever happen. You'll just be spinning your wheels. So yeah, that's what's helped me. Man.
I love that. No, you're taking the time to get to know your kids, and you're not just moving past the issues or scaling over it or being like, just be quiet, we got things to do. And then you never address the issue again. You're letting your students know they can't approach you. And I think that's, like you said, it may be uncomfortable the first time if this is brand new and you've never done that, but it doesn't mean give up. You know, keep making an effort. This is the perfect segue into talking about intentional bridge building. Yeah. So I would love for you to just, first of all, talk about what that means to maybe our listeners right now who don't know what that means to them.
Okay. So, and forgive me, I don't want to put anybody off, but when I'm talking about bridge building, I really get that from my kind of Christian biblical background. And I'm not going to go too far into religion or anything like that. But when I think about building a bridge, I'm thinking about trying to create a safe place to connect with kids, to ultimately get them to learning whatever I'm trying to teach. In our case, it's music ed. My mother was an educator and principal and all that. And so she told me when I got into teaching, she said, you're going to run into an uneven thing here, right? Where ultimately we would love to be 50% pedagogy and 50%, relationship building. But most of the time when you walk into a classroom, it's probably going to be 90% relational and 10% pedagogy. That's just what it is. The kids are just learning you. You're just learning the kids. And if we be honest, growing and quality teachers are still learning the content. Nobody has walked into the classroom and said, I have it all figured out. Right. Yeah, for and sure. Yeah. And so the goal is to get that 90 down to, 50%, to be able to even it out so we can focus in here without taking away from that. And so what I had to learn in the classroom is that I had to build bridges. I had to be intentional about creating a bridge of meeting my students in the middle. This bridge is to take my student from knowing nothing, right, and learning this content that is really foreign to them. I mean, they've heard of music, they've listened to it, they might even sang it in their church, but the logistics and the specifics that go along with learning it is very different, and it's uncomfortable. Right. And most of us Americans, wherever you're born, we don't come out of the womb learning counts and beats and key signatures and musical terms. What we do come out of the womb learning is English and learning how to talk and how to use our voice. And then we learn numbers, like we learn our letters, because these are the things that help us communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you do that for the first, 8-10 years of your life.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, unless you've been in some type of environment, you're now met with black dots with a black stem. If it's in 4/4, it gets one beat.
Yeah.
This is new information, and most of us get very uncomfortable when we have to learn something new, right? I was uncomfortable in my Spanish class from 8th grade all the way through college because I just didn't, you know what I'm saying? It was unnatural to me, right? And so you're more apt to not raise your hand. You're more apt to not really want to be involved because we don't want to seem dumb or seem stupid or ignorant or we don't know, right?
Yes.
And so in my mind, the bridge is me leaving my comfortability of a music educator and walking to the middle, and the student walking from what they don't know or what they think they may not know, and meeting in the middle to make them feel comfortable to walk into this new environment. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I'm a visual person. So that's kind of how I see it in my brain, is that there's this bridge that I have to build to make them want to walk across it. Not even want to learn music. I just need to be a bridge to make them feel comfortable to walk across this bridge, to meet me, to go into an uncomfortable place where they're going to make mistakes. They're going to say the wrong answer. They're going to put 2 beats instead of 1, all of these things. And so once I got that in my head, and I had to realize every day is a bridge that we're building. Every day is something that we're making them feel more comfortable with. And obviously, for my middle school directors and even my elementary teachers, when you get those kids into your elementary program or your band program, the first few years are building those bridges. That first grade, kindergarten, second grade, they're learning your culture and how to stand at the door and where to sit when they come in the room. For the band kids, they're learning, where do I put my instrument? How do I put it together? Do I spin my clarinet while I'm waiting to start class? Or, do I sit at band set and finger through scales or work through the warm up in my head, whatever the case may be. And so you're building that bridge for the fortitude for the next few years of 7th and 8th grade, or the next few years of 3rd, 4th, and 5th, where they're now turning into the leader, the helper, the all-city kid, the kid that couldn't make a good tone quality in 6th grade, but all of a sudden is now one of the better players. And so that's what I had in my head, and that's what I think I try to do even now in my new school district and new job that I've been in. Well, not new anymore. I've been there a year, but going into my 2nd year, learning furthermore, how can I build bridges? How can I be effective in helping these kids not just learn music, but really learn how to be better at whatever they're going to be doing in their life.
Yeah.
So
I love that analogy. No, I'm a visual learner too, and I'm big on analogies. I think that's great. And one thing I was thinking of is I'm guilty of this too. When you start out, you're so excited to teach the musical content that you a lot of times just jump right in and do it, and you're not working on the relationship part of it. But like you also said, there's so much more involved with teaching besides just teaching. Like, how do you hold your instrument? Where do you sit? How do you come in the room? What do you do if you need to go pick an instrument off the shelf? Where do you sit after you get it? Where do your hands go? So many things. And a lot of times I feel like that's where the frustration in classes come from, is where the kids don't know really what they're supposed to be doing, in regards to those things. Right. But you're like, but I'm going to teach you music. Right. And so, well, let me get into that a little further. What are ways music teachers can build bridges in their classrooms?
So I think we have, these textbook kind of formats and processes and procedures, right? Where, you ask a kid certain questions. Hey, what do you think about this? All these different things, which I think are great in essence. But I think what teachers can do to really build bridges, you need to know your context. One of the things that I hate, we have TMEA out here. It's the music convention. Every state has one. Right. And sometimes some of the things that are being taught and given out in the seminar, I think it's great content. I really do. But I think what they miss is that everybody's classroom, everybody's community, everybody's makeup, everybody's, demographics is different. And we handicap teachers when we don't tell them that it's okay to change or remix or reform what it is I'm saying. And even me right now, whatever I'm telling you, I don't want you to feel, I know we are in this heightened, race relations right now in the community and in the world. And that's a whole nother conversation, but don't let my information taint what you do in your classroom, right? If you teach majority, white kids, hey, take what I'm saying and figure out how that meets those kids in that community, right? Yes. I'm not saying everything I'm saying is golden. What I'm saying is there's some relevance to it. You just got to do the hard work to figure out what's in your room. Right. And I think the first thing that we can do is do the research. How am I building a bridge that is an actual bridge and not more so just something that makes me feel safe, right? And so for me, I talked about me taking Spanish. I wish, man, my mother, she is so smart. She made me take 3 years of Spanish in high school, more than what I needed to, because she said, you never know what type of classroom you're going to be in. And you need to be prepared to reach those kids. And I was like, Mama, man, you know what I'm saying? And it was just super like just ignorant. And I hate to even say that I said that, but nevertheless, I took those years. I didn't take it seriously. I wish I would have had, there was another Spanish teacher on the campus at my high school where she made the kids start speaking the language like after the first 2 weeks of school. Like after the first 2 weeks, if you didn't like, your grade was based on you actually. And I think I would have learned better like that. Me doing book work and things, but nevertheless, I said all that to say, when I got to my first school with Eric, I taught a mostly Latino-based community. There were a few African-American kids. There were some few Caucasian kids, but for the most part, it was a Latino community. And over time, I definitely learned words and learned some broken Spanish, and I was able to communicate. But that was a context that I had to learn. And I grew up with plenty of kids from the Latin community. I grew up in a mixed school setting, and things of that nature. But I should have taken that a little bit more seriously, because that could have helped build my bridge stronger, right, in those early years. And so I think it's learning who's in your classroom, learning what the kids like, learning their family backgrounds, and then bringing that in. And this may lead us into the next thing, like what are some things that we could actually do? So like for me, I would play music in my classroom in the mornings, right? So when the kids would come in to practice for morning practice before they went to homeroom, I would have music playing softly. Now, I did both things. I wanted to build a bridge so I could learn them and feel comfortable around them, and they could feel around me. So I played a lot of gospel music. I played some R&B stuff. I played some safe hip hop, but at the same time, I grew up around Selena and Norteña music, and so I pulled some of those people, and they'd be like, Mr. Mclean, what are you doing? I was like, I felt like hearing this. And so then that would open them up to say, okay, well, you need to listen to these people. Don't listen to this group. Listen to these people, right?
I love that. Yeah.
And so it is this, I don't know. I mean, we all know music is a universal language. You and me, I'm an African-American male. You are a Caucasian woman. We are sitting here having a conversation, and I feel like I've known you my whole life. But I think that's simply because music draws us together. And so we don't have to do this, extenuous, like extra work. Just use the very tools we've been doing all our lives, and be okay with, I'm now listening to a lot of music that my children, my students open me up to, that even my kids love, right? And so I think knowing your context, getting to know the people in your room, and then being intentional about using that in the room. Like, what did that music do for those kids when they came to my room? And we had to play through a grade 3 Brian Balmage's piece, or we had to learn whatever, a Christmas piece for our holiday concert. It made them more apt to pay attention, made them more apt to be respectful to what we were doing, because we were able to have that common ground there.
Yeah. So a couple things you said that made me really think. I was that teacher that sat in several workshops, and like you said, such good content. But I remember thinking of my students. My school was about 95% Black students.
Right.
Thinking, if I took this back to my school and tried it with them tomorrow, the looks I would get
Trouble.
From them.
Right.
And so I did a couple of them. I'm like, oh, cool. That's a cool folk dance. We're going to try Alabama gal or whatever it was. And you should have seen these kids looking at me like,
just
who's
great.
Alabama gal?
Right.
Who is she? What do you mean? Peel the banana.
So now you like,
that makes no sense. And I'm like,
right.
oh my
you
gosh.
sitting there like, wait a minute, they didn't say this would happen.
I was like, that wasn't in the instructions. And it wasn't in the, order of directions of what to do if it does fail. And so
right.
I am such a big believer in that. Like, oh my gosh, meet your kids where they're at, modify instruction to meet them, because you can have, I don't know, a 200-page curriculum that has everything laid out and it's so awesome. And maybe 2 things out of that would work, maybe.
Right.
And it's just, and I hate saying that because then I know music teachers are listening to me going, wait, what? You mean I got to go find other stuff? Yes, because it makes it harder. But it also, when I did do that and realized this isn't working, I realized, what can I do that would work?
Right.
And that is when I started finding things that really worked. And like you said, let my kids, we would have like some reward days where on Fridays they could bring their music in, and they were told it's school appropriate.
Of course.
The kids taught me how to Dougie.
Look at
Soldier
that.
Boy. Did I look special doing it? Of course I did. But I did it with them. And that broke down some walls. It was really like, okay, here's this white teacher letting us teach her this stuff, And so, and it is, a lot of it is getting out of your comfort zone, because that's, for me personally, it was like, they know, they can see me. They know my skin color. They know I have not taught in this school before. I also hadn't been music at my school for 7 years. And so I knew, if I try to just do, like, or what I had just learned at college, and like, oh, look, I have all this, what I thought was in a toolkit to bring to my students.
Right.
It wouldn't have worked for a couple reasons, because of the demographic of students I was teaching, but also there hadn't been music for 7 years.
Right.
So I had to just build it up. But I love that. You mentioning that was so, it stuck out to me, because it's so true. And it's so hard, because that is something I feel like that is missing. That you can adapt it. Maybe it's the song, but all the things going along with the song won't work. Well, you take the song and say, what can I do to this?
Right. And I also think what you said is really cool too, that the students are learning from you, because you can take that same thing and turn it around and insert us as, like, we as music teachers, we can teach music for anything. So what does it look like for me to pull something back that they've shown me and say, hey guys, we're talking about beat today. Can you tell me where this beat is? And you play that song, and now they're ultimately like, they are like engaged, and you're teaching about tempo and beat because you played a song that they know, right? Rather than playing, John Jacob Jingleheimer Smith, like, which is great, right? I love that song. But if they hear the Dougie or whatever song may be popular, Bruno Mars, and you're like, hey, let's figure out tempo for this song. They're gonna be like, oh, I know this song. I can figure this out. And so boom, now you're pulling real world things to teach contextual stuff that then you can go right back behind it and say, okay, that tempo was a little bit fast. Let's play this folk song. Where's the tempo on this piece? Right. And now they're using information to learn new information, which is kind of like the whole crux of what we do, right? To use prior to explain new. And so I like that, man. I like that, being out of that comfort zone, man. It's letting students know that it's a two-way street in here, right? Obviously, I'm the owner of this road. I gotta make sure we get down it right, and we know all of those things as teachers. But at the same time, I'm still learning from you. You're gonna say something that you might say an illustration or an analogy or how it helped, what helped you learn this new thing that I'm teaching, that I can throw in my bag and use. So like, students can teach you. You just have to let them. Right. And it's so important. I was thinking back real quick to something Elizabeth Caldwell was on my podcast, and she talked about, she said there was a student that she asked, what's your favorite song? And he said, I don't have a favorite song. What do you mean you don't have a favorite song? And she's like, everybody has a favorite song. I don't listen to music. She's like, what do you mean? So she said she saw him either waiting for a car or his bus or whatever it was after school. And he had headphones in. So she pulled it out and listened, and he was listening to a favorite song. And she said, you're listening to a song right now. He's like, oh, I thought you meant what was my favorite song from music class. Like, he didn't associate music class being music that he listens to outside of school. There was a disconnect. And I think when you're talking about forming a bridge, I think a lot of kids do that, because they think you're teaching this stuff in here, but outside of music, I'm listening to this. So I love that you said,
show kids you can find a steady beat in the tempo and dynamics and songs you listen to every day, and they're like, oh, those songs have that in them too, you know. So true.
For sure.
So good.
Yeah, even I was working through a piece one time, and it was this minor section, and the kids, we were trying to deal with intonation and minor keys and trying to help their ears hear, okay, what do you do with this pitch and this minor chord and this march that we're playing? And so they was like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, you should love this chord because this is a chord that makes up most of the music that you listen to. And they're like, what do you mean? So, you know, I got my little keyboard there. So I play a song and I'm just playing minor chords or minor scales, or I'm listening to the song because I play in church and I just pick up the song that quick. And then I'm like, these are chords that you're hearing in this song. It's just shaped differently against the melody that you've heard in this other song. Right. And so, yeah, it is, man, it's a tool that keeps on teaching.
Yeah. Love that. So elementary music teachers in general, whether you teach elementary, middle, or high school, are limited in the amount of time you see your kids.
Right.
And I know a lot of times I've heard from teachers say, but how am I supposed to build a relationship with my students when I have to get through so much instruction and let's say in a 45-minute class period, and you know, that's an average. So what are your suggestions for music teachers to build a relationship with their students when they don't see them very often?
Man, I think one of the things that I used to do was building leaders in, like when I taught elementary music, or not taught, but student taught for that small window. I had little things that the kids could do. So like we would do this rhythm stick exercise, right? Where we had this chart of different rhythms and I would click them out and then the students would do the same thing. So it might've been quarter note, eighth note, quarter note, eighth note, right? And they have to do it at the same tempo that I do it at. Well, I would allow certain kids to come up and we just call it like Freestyle Fridays, basically. It was letting them come up, and I said, you have to use the rhythms from the rhythm bank, but you can mix them up however you want to, right? And you get to see this is crazy, but you saw the personality of not only the kids, but the music that they listen to. So just the level of tempos, just the style of the rhythm. And it was refreshing. It was really exciting because the kids would come in and they would want it like right away. Oh, are we gonna be able to do rhythm time and free? And I was like, well, I actually have to teach something today. But if you do it, if you do what we need to do, I'll try to give us some time today, but we'll make sure we get to it on Friday. So that was one thing, like just having it could be rhythm, it could be whatever, cool thing. For me, it was rhythm because the kids really liked it. And they like to kind of copy me and see how much, they would come in class and be like, I bet I can learn this rhythm faster than you. And so that was really cool. Another thing that's really exciting is having kids maybe pick like each day of the week, having the students pick like what was your song of this week or what's the song of the week that'll play in the classroom as you guys come in every day this week. Like give me your favorite artist that you like. And I know all the elementary, music teachers you get kids line up, they walk in, they go to their spots. In that, I don't know, 6-minute to maybe 2-minute process, what does it look like to play a song while they come in? And granted, I know this is scary because it gets them all hype and more energetic. But it allows them to look forward to walking into your room and getting into whatever it is you're teaching, because I know when I go to music class, they're going to play my song because I got to pick song of the week. And so you get to see the identity, you get to see the culture of your classroom, so every Friday or at the end of each week, who's picking my song for next week? Who's been doing what needs to be done? They pick that song. Monday morning, they might have had a bad morning. They might have gotten into some trouble on the bus, but they know, wait a minute, I picked the song last week. So we get to listen to, Justin Bieber as we go sit in our seat or whatever the case may be. So those are just two things that I think will work really well in those classrooms.
Yeah. Like you said, gets them excited to come in.
Yeah.
And I think even though it's like, kind of a peppy thing to have them come in the room to fast music, there's still ways you can settle them down or it'll lead perfect. It's just a beginning of the classroom procedure.
For sure.
Whatever that may look like for you, but just starting them on the same way every time they come in, even though it's a different song, I think is awesome. Right. The kids will know, and they are, just be, with your instructions after the song's done, we're going right into ... whatever that is. So just being clear with your instructions, I think is, noted and important. All right. Well, Justin, I want to ask you this. So when it comes to kids being labeled as bad in the music room, you know what I'm talking about. There's always going to be those behavior problem kiddos, unfortunately. But that's not always the case. The behavior's there, yes. But what I mean is a lot of times there's something else going on behind the scene. And so how do you... Well, you've already talked about building relationships with the kiddos. So is that how you approach that with these kids who are just viewed as bad? And one thing that bothers me about that is there's teachers who will automatically assign these labels to the students before you've even had a chance to get to know them. Right. And they're just automatically like, watch out for that child before I've even met them. And I don't like that. I want to have them come into my room on a completely even playing field without me having any... Unless it's an IEP I need to be aware of or something like that. But behavior-wise, let me get to know the child on my own. Anyways, I just want to hear all your thoughts about everything I just said there, because I know that was a lot.
So I'm going to say that building a bridge and doing all of that stuff is its own thing. I don't know if that necessarily is the end-all, be-all, and fix-it-all for students that have behavior problems. And what I've come to know and come to understand is that those kids may never act like that in my classroom. Matter of fact, in all of my teaching and my years of being an educator, for the most part, 9 times out of 10, most of those kids never even show that off in my room. And I think part of that is because what you said, I'm going to get to know them, and then my standard is for everybody in the room. I think sometimes once we get those kids and we hear that rhetoric and that narrative, we automatically become teachers that are, this is for this pattern of students, and then this is for you. And once the kid notices that, then they're already going to go the opposite direction, because you've shown this partiality. You've shown this kind of like separation between he, she, and the rest of the kids. But for me, when you come in my room, these are my standards. These are my expectations. This is how we run my room. This is what we do. This is how we operate. And we're going to go from there. And then in those moments where that kid shows some of those behavior problems, and whether that's just because they're up and about kid, or maybe they have some other things going on outside of the classroom, now I know how to gauge my classroom. Now I know what are some of my buzzwords, what are some things that I do naturally as a teacher that because for me, I'm at times I can joke and I can play and we can, have that moment. But if I know that I'm teaching this period and that student's in my class, then I want to be very careful. I don't want to change who I am. I don't want to change the culture of my room, but I know that I am the temperature setter. I set everything in the room. So at moments where I know I could probably, like this class, I could probably be a little bit more funnier because they know how to get back on track. This class, I'm going to do it right in the open. And then the rest of the class, we got to stay to business because they have a tendency to get off track, and it may be hard for some of them to get back on. Yeah. And so I think it's setting your precedents early, not setting, this is what I expect, but I've heard about you, or you need to sit over here. And then the other thing I also do is, especially in the middle school group, is when I have those kids that are in band, I put them next to kids that are leaders, right? I put those kids next to kids that can help them do things better. Now, you got to be careful, because we all have those kids in our band programs, our orchestra, choir, music programs that affect other kids, but have a tendency to be affected as well. So you got to know the difference in between those kids that are going to be like, hey, chill, we playing right now. And the difference between the kids is like, I mean, that was kind of funny. You know what I'm saying? So you got to gauge that. You got to know your community. You got to know your environment. But never trust what other teachers tell you, because you don't know how other teachers run their room. You don't know what kind of school they were in before. And the kids are always looking for a new slate. And most of the time I've had other teachers, the math teacher, the science teacher, come to me about a student and say, what are you doing? How are you? They come in here. Every time I see them, they're in your class with all their supplies. And I wish that I could tell them this magical trick, but I'm just honest. I said, there's a certain way I run my classroom. We have a conversation. If there are moments where he or she may have a day, we have our conversation and we get to it. But I'm not going to come down and teach at this level that people say you need to be taught at. Right. I'm going to teach up here, and I'm going to work at my level, and I'm going to push you to come up here. Yeah. Right? Because some of the behavior problem is because they feel inferior, or they feel like they're being taught down to instead of being brought up to a standard. And I think if we have enough patience and enough time to teach up to our standard, whatever that is. If in your elementary music class, it is, we are silent whenever I'm passing out, music books or passing out music instruments, then you remind them of that. And you remind them of that by also telling that to other kids and explaining to them, I'm not holding anybody else in this classroom to a different standard. Everybody's at the same standard. So while I'm passing out these rhythm sticks or I'm passing out these recorders, I need you to be silent so we can move about in our class properly. And once they see you talking to everybody else, because what they're used to is being talked at as the kind of exterior or the scapegoat of the classroom, or being given extra directions like, hey, everybody, now remember, do you even have your pencil? Did you come prepared today? Once that happens, then that kid is in a place of like, well, what am I even doing here? Yeah. But if I'm the teacher and I'm saying, hey, does everybody have their stuff today? Thank you. Let's get to work. Then he doesn't feel, or she doesn't feel, X'd out. She feels a part of this community, that everybody's being held to the same standard, that everybody's being pushed to the expectation of the teacher. So that's kind of what's worked for me.
I love that. And even like you said, in an elementary music class too, just even the simplest procedures and them knowing what to expect. And what I'm getting at is when I started doing that, I had a procedure for everything. The kids, I remember, except for when music was being made, obviously, singing, instruments, all that. There's noises in music that should be there. But then I would have, even my principal sometimes in observations would be like, how do you have them so quiet when you're teaching? And I was like, what do you mean? I just didn't know there was any difference. I was like, because I expected that from them. They knew that. But I was laughing because, and I want to know if this has happened to you, when there's a new student that would arrive and they would be trying to talk or messing around with something.
And everybody was like, what
everybody, they would look at me and then look at this kid and look back at me and go, no.
Right.
And I remember a couple of my students, Miss Preston doesn't play. Don't play. You need to stop. And I was like, they would like help me out without me having to say, because they just knew. But they'd be waiting. They knew the kid was new, so they're like, "Is she gonna give this?"
Because they understood that there was a level of consistency.
Yes.
That every day they came to music class, it was gonna be something new, fresh, and different, but it was gonna be the same format. We're not gonna change what we're doing. I may introduce a new idea, new song, new musical idea, but the same format by which we get to it is gonna be the same. And so, I've gotten kids that have been inserted into my classroom because they got in band late, or they got in like the third week of school instead of the first few weeks because their schedule was messed up.
Which that's hard anyways, isn't it?
That's super hard. Yeah. But I'm already in a system. The kids, most of the kids already know what to do. Right. So when this new kid comes in, they're very much like, wait, nobody's talking.
How do I hold my instrument? I don't know what to do.
Right. And nobody them. Like, they're just kind of like, why would you do that? And so, and then I have to pull them aside and say, hey, we're already kind of in our process. So I'm going to link you up with this student. They're going to get you caught up on what to do. They're going to be your neighbor, your buddy, if you will. And so, that's but good. It's a testament to consistency. That's one thing we have to do as teachers. And whatever you teach, it is consistency. When I see lack of connection, lack of relationship building, is because we took one day off, or we took one period off, and then it threw off everything. So yeah.
One thing, when we were talking about what you were going to discuss today about building bridges, that came to mind for me, and I get asked this a lot, is the bridge going from, elementary music to a secondary music program. And I could go a couple different ways with this question, but first of all, I want to ask you this. Can you tell, when the kids come into your middle school band program, the kids who have had music or equality music instruction versus the ones who don't, or do you just kind of, everybody starts on the same playing field?
Listen, one of my biggest things, and this may not be the PC or or going with everything, but I'm a big component of music programs in elementary schools, and not band programs. If you have the wherewithal to do it and do it well, by all means do it. But I just wish that we had more music teachers that were just like indebted to just teaching music education from the early childhood to fifth grade. What I would know, because at the school that I got to, there would be some elementary programs around the community that fed into my middle school. So there would be kids that would say, oh, I was in the fourth and fifth grade band. When I left third grade, we got a chance to be in the band. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So this, my first year is being the director of band. So I'm like, oh, that's great. I could beef up some of the numbers in my second band, my developing band, my concert band, and maybe insert some of those kids into the jazz band so I could kind of build that infrastructure to always replenish my group. But what I started realizing is these kids couldn't play. They didn't have good tone quality. They didn't know proper fingering and technique. They couldn't even play, a concert B flat scale whole notes at 75 beats per minute. And if you've been in band for 2 years, I'm not saying you should come to me being able to play grade 4, grade 3 music, but you should be at a very at the lowest level, at least concert B flat scale, 1 octave, quarter notes and half notes. You know what I'm saying? But these kids couldn't do that. Then when I would put those kids in my band class, they would be so they would just be so anxious. And so oh, I don't know any of this. What's the time signature? Why is he asking us to clap and count? Why are we sight reading? Slurring? What is, and all of these things that I spent so much time in my students, 6th grade beginner band. It was boot camp. We're trying to make you prepare for next level competitive band, region band, all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
And so halfway through that, I just started saying, I don't care if you were in elementary band. You're going to go to beginner band. I'm sorry. Unless there was only one band program in the elementaries that fed my middle school that put out quality kids. But he was a former middle school and high school band director that was teaching elementary music and these kids could play. They were 4th and 5th graders. He had them on a strict regime. If they wanted to be in band, they had to attend his summer band camp at the school, all of these things, right? And they were taking private lessons. So I was like, if you came from this school, you can move into my second band, right? Or you can, you may even be able to top out and be into my top performing ensemble. But for the most part, I knew the kids that came from those band programs. Then on the other hand, I had kids who came from schools who didn't have band programs, but they had a music program, right? They had a music teacher. But then I would be introducing basic things, just the beginner music theory stuff. Just here's a quarter note, or talking about tempo and beat, and now every song has a beat, and we're going to center that around numbers, and those numbers expand and this, that, and the third, right?
Yeah.
And I would get kids that would be like, what's a quarter note?
Oh my gosh.
What? And in my mind, I'm like, okay, even if the music teacher wasn't super invested, but just taught, basic tenements of our school of thought in regards to music, they should be able to catch on to this. They had no recollection of beat, time, melody. And it was cool for me because the way that I teach as though you know nothing. And so you'll come out at the end really knowing it. And so I started to notice, and I started to ask, I said, how many of you had music in your ancillary or your specials classes in elementary? And out of a class of maybe 30 beginners, maybe 10 kids raised their hands. And the other kids, I said, well, what did you guys do? Well, we watched videos. We kind of listened to some things, but a lot of times we didn't have music. And I was like, wow.
Oh my goodness.
This is what's happening. And so what hurts is you get these kind of music illiterate kids that come to you, and not of their own fault, but because they aren't being invested to in their school system or in their elementary school. Then they come to me where they're going to get a very robust and orthodox, music introduction and program. But then I feel bad for some of those kids that continue at other middle schools who the band program is not concerned about being of success and of, standard. Then they go to high school. And so they've had, 6 to 7 years of just maybe subpar music training. And then you get to high school and it's like, we got marching band, we got marching competition, we have all of these things. So I could definitely tell what kids knew and what kids didn't know. And so that's why I just preach and say, hey man, just teach the kids the basics. Help them know melody, help them know terms like tempo and speed, and help them know time signatures, help them know what a quarter note. Can they count an eighth note? Can they count a 16th note?
Yeah.
And that helps us in the long run. In the school district that I'm in now, I can definitely tell. And don't get me wrong, when I was in my former school district, I loved it. There were some schools that were really solid, and those kids came to me, and it was just like opening the door for them. Once I opened the door, they were like, "Oh, okay, cool," and they were running with it, which allowed me to pay more attention to some of those kids who didn't get that infrastructure that was needed. So, yes, I can. On one hand, I got these kids that didn't have music programs and did, and then I got kids that were in band but really weren't. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And so trying to figure out how to meet them all where they're at is probably just pretty interesting. Yeah, I could see that. So we've talked about so much today, and I would just love for you to share any other closing thoughts you have for elementary music teachers before we go.
Well, I would think that one of the biggest things that's really helped me is building a community, a family, if you will. I had one of my former band students in middle school. He ended up not playing in high school. He was one of those athlete guys, but really good student. He recently, he's done with high school, has been doing some junior college things, and is looking to take the next step. So he sent me a message on Instagram, and he was like, "Hey, Mr. Mclean, I'd love to talk to you. I have some questions. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do next in my life in regards to college." Now, I taught his cousin who was in my band. He was a French horn player, knew the family fairly well. And we keep in contact. They'll send me messages on Facebook or on when I had our last child. Congratulations, all of these things. But I haven't really talked to him in a real sense in some years. And so I called him, we talked, I gave him, what I thought was very good advice, and just gave him some tools to kind of help make a decision between what would be his next step. And in my mind, I don't know if that's a normal thing for most band directors, right? And I think he's not the only one. That's just one story that I can think of. But I have kids hit me up all the time, even at the former school that I taught, the high school and middle school. Some of those kids, they contacted me via email, via, text message, and asked questions about how do I deal with this new director? How do I deal with this new environment? And I feel like quitting band, all of these different things. The second group of kids that I ever started on instruments graduated high school this year, and they're going off to college. And so they are, hey, I remember when you told me this, I appreciate these words. And I think that's because what I tried to create with the bridge building and all of that was ultimately I wanted to create a family. I wanted to create this community of kids that, no matter what happens throughout the rest of your day, when you walk in here, this is a family. And it helped me speak to things like bullying. If I found out that somebody was being made fun of, I would always joke and say, I'm the parent in here, so I'm the only person that can make fun of folks in here, right? And everybody else, we're not doing that, right? And so I would make sure we understood. I said, there are differences in this room, and what you like or how you live or things that you do may be different from somebody else, but we're going to respect everybody in this room, right? And I think that helped create this foster this idea of community and family. I can trust these people. And a lot of these kids, my middle school at that time went to 2 different high schools. So some of those kids that started in 6th grade band together, they were each other's best friends in the midst of this changing time. They then went to high school and became section leaders and drum majors and officers and vice versa. And then at the other school that I ended up teaching at, most of the kids in that band program were in my band program in middle school. So the success that we had was them growing from 6th grader knowing nothing to 7th grader and all of these things. And so what I would try to do is I would always preach and teach about the kids that, like, when we say you guys are the future of this band, when I would go to my middle school and I would say, hey, you're a 6th grader, but in a few years, you'll be the 8th grader and the leader of this band program. And then before you know it, you'll be at the high school. And those kids at the high school would love to come back to the school. They still had the band hoodies that we created and that they bought. They had their band shirts from every year if they bought a new one. And
I love that.
They would come back to campus when I was still just a head director at Hamilton, and they would want to talk to the kids. They would say, hey, this is how this needs to go. This is how you need to be doing this. Listen to Mr. Mclean. And then I created a concept where in the mornings during band practice, when my 8th graders would come in, I would say, instead of you sitting there practicing in your sections, which I think is great, take time to sit with those 6th graders, help them, because you remember what it felt like when you couldn't play. You remember what it felt like when you couldn't get the finger in for middle C and you were trying to keep your arm. You remember all of those things. So help them. And it created a bond that a lot of those kids they'll send me pictures of, oh, I remember when we went to this field trip and we had this competition and we went to UIL. And so it brings my heart joy. And so my advice to all of you out there is create, especially if you're in a system where your elementary kids go to the same middle school and you're in one of those suburban feeder programs, man, create a system where kids can come back and invest in your program. If that means that those 5th graders that are now in choir and band in the middle school, get in contact with your team, have a planning session where there could be a field trip where they're not only bringing their band and choir over to promote band, but have spotlights for those kids to speak to your students. We used to do an elementary band tour to prep up the band drive and get more kids interested in band. And I would be intentional about going to the schools where the kids remembered their music teacher. They remembered the processes, the culture. And when we would play our program, and in between the programs or in between different songs we would be playing, I would have those kids come up and introduce themselves and introduce the next song. And they would say, I went to this school. I remember Mr. and Mrs. such and such, and you guys need to keep going with music and come over to Hamilton and be in the band program. And so it created this family, and those kids were like, oh, that's my cousin. Oh, I know him. Or, oh, I remember you from last year. You were a 5th grader here. How did you, And so build a community, man. You will not be disappointed if you build a community, if you build that family aspect, not just with coming to music, but this is home. And so you'll have to run kids away from your band hall, and you have to say, hey, I'm on my off period, right? Let me eat.
I need a break.
Right. I need a break. I'm locking my door.
Yeah.
But it is well received. It's well appreciated. And it's a joy. It's something that I'll never forget, and it gives you that confidence and it gives you that fuel to keep going, because we all know we have burnout. And there are moments, there are seasons, there are semesters where you're just like, if I got to do this another day, I'm just over it,
Right.
but to have that community and to be reminded of kids that you helped, that grew from nothing to something, that grew not only in their plan, but just in who they were, it will help you kind of keep pushing along so those kids can be impacted by you. So,
so good.
So
good. Oh, this whole episode has been amazing. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, man. No, thank you. Like I was talking to Eric and I was like, this thing is this is nothing we planned. When I tell you, we were just like, we should do a podcast. We should just talk about some of the stuff. And I think that, it our voices allows us to connect with a person like yourself who can identify what we're talking about because you've done it, you've lived it. And so more people need to hear about our stories and hear about our classrooms so they can say, wait a minute, I didn't learn this in my CUIN or my educational foundation class, but this is just as good as that book they told me to read. And it can help your classroom in so many ways.
Oh, so, for sure. Well, let everybody know where they can connect with you online and keep these conversations going with you.
So I'm on if you listen to a podcast, the Score podcast, you can find it on all media outlets. I'm on Facebook, Justin Mclean, Justin Mclean. I'm on Twitter. I think on Twitter I am, let me look at that because I'm just not.
No, Twitter's the same for me. Like I have a Twitter account, but
I'm using it. But okay, so my Twitter and my Instagram are the same. It's Just Mac Music, JustMackMuzik. Man, hit me up if you have questions. If you want me or Eric to be on your show or give you some, tools or whatever, we'd love to do it. We're in the process right now. We've done this. We're doing some other podcasts. We're collaborating with different people. We're also trying to build a platform like you have and interviewing other people that do things that we don't necessarily do or have an understanding to do. And so we got different stuff coming up. So please reach out. It is time to, change what we've been doing in music to just help us continue creating new ways and pushing forward towards the future. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I look at your Instagram and it's so cool because your kids are really cool. So
Well, thank you. They're a mess, but I love them so much. Well, thank you so much. All those links will be in the show notes, so you guys make sure to look for that and definitely check out their podcast. It's amazing. You'll get so much from it. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Justin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, I would love for you to review the show and leave a rating on iTunes. To find out more about how I can help you gain momentum in your elementary music teaching career, head to thedomesticmusician.com, where you'll find free downloads, courses, the blog, and so much more. Continue teaching music and never doubt the impact you're making each and every day in the lives of your students.